So there's 3 simple tips you need to know before mixing your oranges. The first is that your simple recipe to make any orange is just using red and yellow. Now the second tip is that unfortunately not all reds and yellows mix well to make a really vibrant orange. And that's to do a little bit with color theory. Now I'm not going to go too much into depth in this video, but just as an overview, 2 colors on the opposite sides of the color wheel, so orange and blue, will always mix to make a really murky, muddy color. So to apply that to our orange mix, you want to pick a red and a yellow that has no blue in it. So you're trying to pick reds and yellows that are more closer to our orange tones and yellow tones, and avoid having any violets, greens, and blues in it. And if you do that, you can get really punchy and beautiful oranges. And the third tip is you actually don't need red to make orange. So I've discovered fluorescent pink makes a really punchy and vibrant orange, and I'm gonna show you that mix later on in the video. So before we get to our vibrant oranges, I'm gonna show you what happens when you mix reds and yellows that have blues in them, just to show you what it looks like. So I have a lemon yellow here, which has a lot of blue in it. And I also have an alizarin crimson, which also has violets and blue in it. So what I'm gonna do is, I have it here on my palette, and I'm just gonna mix them in roughly equal amounts. So I'm just gonna mark it down here under the don't column, because as you can see here, it's more of like a muddy orange. So that's what happens when you mix reds and yellows that have blues in them. So next, I'm gonna show you what a punchy, beautiful orange looks like. For that, I've grabbed some cadmium red medium hue, which is really nice and warm. And it's more like this kind of red over here, so really close to orange. And then I've also grabbed some cadmium yellow medium hue, which is also leaning more towards orange, and none of those have the blue in it. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna grab the red and the yellow, and I'm gonna put a little bit extra yellow here because this cadmium red is like really potent. All right, so this orange is really, really nice and punchy here. And you're gonna see the difference when they're side by side. So as you can see, when they're side by side, this one is super vibrant and bright, and this one is really dull and muddy. And that just shows you picking the right red and yellow to make your orange makes a huge difference. Now you might be wondering how to tell if your reds or yellows have any blue bias in them. And you can do that usually by just gauging them with your eye. So I have the 2 reds here, the cadmium red and the alizarin crimson. And usually when you put them side by side, you can usually tell which one has a blue bias. So from just looking at them both here, you can tell that this alizarin crimson has more blue in it, and versus this cadmium red medium, it has a yellow bias. And the same thing goes for the yellows. So you can tell this cadmium yellow medium hue has a lot of warmth to it. And then while this lemon yellow has a lot of blue undertones to it. So this one's more cooler. So when mixing orange, you definitely want to stay away from the cooler tones. All right, now we're gonna have fun, and we're going to create a color mixing chart of a whole slew of oranges. So for the first mix, we're going to mix cadmium yellow and cadmium red in a 2-to-1 ratio. So we're just going to mix that up. And then we're just going to paint a swatch of it under this orange column. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that mix over here, a little bit of it, and we're going to mix a little bit of white into it to make a tint. So this is going to really lighten up that orange, like that. And then we're going to paint that swatch in. So you can see already, it's like a really big difference between just that pure orange and then adding a little bit of white into that mix. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab a little bit more of that orange over here. And then we're gonna add a little bit of gray. So I'm gonna add black and white over in another pile to make a neutral gray. And then I'm just gonna add a dab of it in that orange mix. And that's just gonna neutralize that orange. And then it's gonna create it kind of like a little bit of like a antique orange. And then what we're gonna do is our final row is we're going to darken that orange with black. But here, black is really, really intense. So we want really, really little of it in that mix. So I would say just a dab of it on the end of your brush, like very little, into that mix. Otherwise, it's going to become more black rather than orange. And then we're just going to paint that down. And then that's a really nice darker orange. So that is our first column with our cadmium yellow and cadmium red mix. So the next one we're going to do is the fluorescent pink and cadmium yellow. And this is my favorite orange mix because you're going to see in a few seconds, it's going to be super punchy, super bright. So for the fluorescent pink and cad yellow, I like to add them in 1:1 ratios because the pink here is not as intense as that red, and it usually works fine in a 1:1 ratio. I'm going to mix it. And as you see it getting mixed, it's going to retain that vibrancy from that fluorescent pink, but it's going to turn it into a really like beautiful orange. And then we're just going to paint that down. And you can see when you put that beside the original orange here, it's even brighter. The one thing to note with fluorescent colors though is that they're light fast, meaning they will fade over time. So if you're using this in a painting, I would definitely seal it with a top coat that prevents fading of coloring. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some of that and over in another pile, and we're going to add a little bit of white. And you can see the difference even between this tint of orange here and this one here. This almost has like a salmon color to it. Now we're going to add a little bit of gray. So move a little bit over to another pile and add just a smidgen gray. And that's a really interesting orange. It's a little bit lighter than that one up here, and it still has a lot of vibrancy. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add that orange in another pile, and then we're going to add just a tiny little bit of black on the tip of our brush. We're going to mix that in. We're going to paint that down. Oh, that's a beautiful darker orange. And our final mix is we're going to combine these two here. So we're going to do fluorescent pink, cadmium red, and cadmium yellow in a 2:1:2 ratio. I'm going to move some over and right over. I'll do it over here. So 2 parts pink, 2 parts yellow, and then 1 part red. And this orange is going to be a really nice warmer orange, kind of like a pinky red orange. So this is what the base color looks like. It has a lot of that beautiful red in it. And then we're going to create a tint. So we'll grab a little bit of that original orange and just a little bit of white to lighten it. See what we get. And I love color mixing because it's always a surprise, the colors you can create. A good surprise. Okay, that's beautiful. That's more like a coral orange. Now we're going to add a little bit of that reddy orange over here, and just a little bit of gray, and then we're going to paint that down. And finally, we're going to paint in our final shade of this color. So I'm going to move that over in another pile again. And just at the tip of my brush, I'm going to grab just a tiny bit of black. Oops, that might be a little bit much, so I might have to, yeah. I kind of added, I added a little bit too much black into the mix, and it just turns it like a, kind of like a brown. So what I'm going to do to save this color is I'm going to add in more of that orange and see if we can save it. So I'm just going to paint that down, and yep, we didn't lose that orange, yay. We're able to save the orange. It's always good to end on a good note, eh? And the other thing here too is that you can create a whole bunch of tints and a whole bunch of shades by just varying the amounts of white and black you do into the mix. This is just like an overall example, but you can actually create like an unlimited amount of oranges by varying your whites and your blacks.